Okay, so I'd like to talk about some of our uh, educational and broader picture issues concerning children with disabilities. And to do that, I must first start with some national legislation. Back in the 1970s, what was then called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed. And that, for the first time, required that all children with disabilities be given a free, appropriate public education. Today, we'll say FAPE is sort of an abbreviation of that. That means that all children, regardless of differences in ability, have a right to a free and appropriate public education in the United States. This was reauthorized by Congress up through 1990 when it was renamed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so today you'll hear IDEA. And I want you to notice some of the changes that happened in the culture in those 20 years. Uh, think of the difference between education for all handicapped children and individuals with disabilities. So we changed the word handicap to disabilities, but we also changed the order of the words. And this is really an important thing. This is called people first language. So instead of saying handicapped children, where the first thing that we're describing about those children is that they're handicapped or disabled children, we say individuals with disabilities or children with disabilities. So they're a person first and they happen to have this difference in ability. And that's important not just for how people hear what you're saying and how you're describing individuals. It's also important for us and how we think. I'm a person who thinks that words have power, and how we communicate with our words have power. And so when we get in the habit of saying a child with autism instead of saying an autistic child, or we get in the habit of saying a child uh, who has visual difficulties rather than saying that blind child, we we start to, as we frame it, we start to think of them as that unique person first. And so anyone who is going to work with children and families, this is so crucially important to get in the habit of always catching yourself, of using people first language, of always putting the person first, and then uh, that difference in ability. In 1997, IDEA was amended to add the use of instructional technology and assistive technology, uh, and to include an individualized education plan, which is called an IEP, and what was called the least restrictive environment, which means an LRE. A least restrictive environment means that each child should be in the environment that's most like the environment that every other child is in, that they can function in and succeed in. A generation or two ago, the idea that children with disabilities were attending the same classroom as their peers who did not have disabilities was called mainstreaming. And so you had the idea that we took these children with disabilities from one setting and now we were moving them into the mainstream. And today we don't use that word, we use inclusion, because that takes the burden from the person with the disability, from them being mainstreaming to the environment. Inclusion means that all individuals are included in the daily routines. So, regardless of sex or gender or ability or ethnicity or any background, uh, everyone is welcome and included there. So, that puts the burden on the group to include everyone, not the person who has the difference to be mainstreamed into the group. Every child has a right to, if they will benefit in achieving their educational goals from technology, to have access to that. It can be instructional technology, which is hardware and software to accommodate those learning needs, or it can be assistive technology, which help those children with disabilities function in the environment. So assistive technology might be a wheelchair or something that helps the child to participate in that environment. Every child who has a diagnosed disability that's impacting their ability to perform in school has a right to an IEP. And we talk about IEPs from children from 4 to 20. Uh, Younger than age 4, we'll talk about individualized family service plans. And a child has a right to those too, but there the focus is really at a family level, and support for the family of the young child and helping that child prepare and learn. Uh, at age 4, we shift to an IEP, which is a focus on the individual child and their learning settings. And the IEP, the purpose of it is to spell out, here is a program, an educational plan to fit with this child and their individual needs. It's related to their learning capacity, and it's designed, the purpose is to provide educational benefits to the child. An IEP should be collaborative. It usually includes what's called an IEP team, where the child's family, uh, maybe a service coordinator, such as a special education teacher, or the people who are providing services to the child, an assessment team, uh, usually at least one general education teacher, usually one school administrator, and anyone with a particular expertise in the particular needs of the child. So, for example, if the child had a visual disorder, there might be someone there with that particular expertise. Or if a child needed speech and language services, there might be a speech and language therapist or an audiologist as a part of that team. The IEP should include a statement of where the child's current level of performance is, annual goals for the child, and benchmarks to know progress towards that goal, what sorts of services, specific services, and aids will be provided to the child, and if there will be modifications or supports for the school personnel. And if there's going to be any occasions that the child will not participate with children who are non-disabled in the typical classroom, there should be an explanation of that and of the extent of it. There should be dates included for when services begin and where the services will be provided, and the criteria for evaluating uh, those procedures, and a schedule for determining when objectives are being achieved, and each program must be evaluated every year. I mentioned least restrictive environment a moment ago. That means a child with a disability must be educated in the setting that's as similar as possible as one in which children without disabilities are educated. Um, Inclusion is related to the idea of least restrictive environment. Inclusion means that all children are included in the group. So children with special needs are included full time in a typical classroom. That's usually how the word inclusive classroom is used. So inclusion means that children with different abilities are included in the social, recreational, and educational activities that other children experience. Now, this has the benefit of enhancing uh, children with disabilities, their social competence, so that they may later live more comfortably and successfully in typical mainstream day-to-day society. But it also has, and this is important, it also has the benefit of promoting acceptance of children and individuals with disabilities through the reduction and removal of stigma that our society has placed on to disabilities. And so this is really a benefit to the children who do not have differences in ability as they learn to interact with people who may be different from them, but who are still full participating members in society. If inclusion is well monitored by adults and structured, uh, it can have very positive benefits for all children and result in understanding and friendship between children with different abilities. However, if it's not well structured and monitored by adults, there can be the potential for negative uh, outcomes that the children with disabilities might be might not be noticed, or they might be overprotected, or they might be stereotyped. But when done well, inclusion is a benefit for all children. So when integrating children with different abilities, it's important that teachers and staff and those who work with children and families recognize that those different agencies, that those different groups are interdependent on each other, and that they're there to think about the long-term value of those inclusive efforts. It's important that the professionals collaborate with other professionals and adults who support the child's development and make the additional effort that's needed to not just take care of getting through today, but to really focus on the educational benefit, the long-term benefit of children with special needs, with disabling conditions in non-specialized settings.